They said my mailbox was the wrong shade of blue. 2 weeks later, my home was in the river. But what they didn't know was who my brother was, or what was about to come crashing down on them. It started the way a nightmare often does, subtly, almost laughably. I was sipping my morning coffee, watching a cardinal hop across the birdbath Sarah and I installed 25 years ago, when the low growl of a bulldozer's engine cut through the air like a warning shot. I stood slowly. Not again. I stepped onto my porch, the familiar creak of the boards beneath me, chosen by Sarah for their warmth and imperfection, felt like an omen. There she was, Eleanor Winters, HOA president, self-appointed neighborhood monarch, and expert in weaponizing regulations. She stood with one hand on her hip, the other gripping a clipboard like it was a gavel. Her immovable blonde bob didn't twitch in the breeze. "Mr. Williams?" she called out, wearing that tight-lipped smile she reserved for special occasions, like humiliating people. "We need to discuss your continued violations." I squinted, hoping she was referring to something new. Instead, she extended a perfectly manicured finger toward my mailbox. "That shade of blue isn't in compliance. HOA regulations, page 17, section 4, clearly list forest green or matte black as approved options." "This mailbox has stood here 15 years, I replied calmly. "It was my wife's favorite color. She picked it when we moved in." Eleanor's smile vanished. "Grandfathered-in exceptions were revoked when the board updated the bylaws last month. The vote was unanimous." Behind curtained windows, I saw silhouettes, neighbors watching, but not intervening. Not since Eleanor forced the Thompsons to remove their daughter's wheelchair ramp. Nobody pushed back anymore. "Fine," I said, biting down every word I wanted to hurl at her. "I'll consider repainting it. You have 48 hours. After that, you'll be fined $100 per day. And Mr. Williams," she added, glancing toward Sarah's rose garden, "those non-native plants will need addressing as well." I froze. "Those roses are staying." Eleanor's eyes stayed flat. "Sentiment doesn't override regulations. Board meets tonight. Further action will be discussed." She walked off, already snapping pictures of my property, my gnome collection, the rainwater barrels, even the bird feeder Sarah had hung for finches. My phone buzzed. James, my younger brother. He was calling to confirm I'd be at his big swearing-in ceremony tomorrow. He'd just been appointed Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, forcing a smile into my voice. He didn't need to know the war I was fighting back home. He'd been my rock through Sarah's cancer and passing. I wasn't about to burden him with HOA madness. That afternoon, a formal letter appeared in my mailbox. The same non-compliant mailbox. Eleanor and her board were demanding the removal of the rose garden within 24 hours, citing water conservation policies. If I failed to comply, they'd send in landscapers. I paced my porch until dusk, then knocked on Gregory's door. He was 2 houses down, a retired attorney with sharp instincts and a low tolerance for bullies. "They can't do this," Gregory said, adjusting his glasses. "Those roses were planted before those water restrictions even existed, and you've got that full rain capture system installed." "This isn't about water," I muttered. Gregory paused, then pulled out a folded site map and laid it across his coffee table. "You're right. This isn't about roses. Take a look. Riverdale Heights Phase 2, filed quietly last month. Luxury condos. Guess where they want to break ground?" I traced his finger straight through my land. My house would have to go. "Exactly. Eleanor's husband sits on the board of the development firm. She's been targeting you because you won't sell. They need your land to access the riverfront. You're the final piece." A chill crawled up my spine. That night, I walked my property with a camera and documented everything. I started with Sarah's rose garden and ended with the mailbox, the one she insisted made the house feel like home. Something told me I'd need proof. At dawn, I buttoned my jacket and tied my tie. I'd promised James I'd be there for his big day, and I would be. As I locked my front door, Eleanor appeared again, this time with 3 HOA board members and the same bulldozer that had rattled me awake the day before. "Just some minor landscaping improvements," she chirped. "Community enhancements." I looked at the operator. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'll be back this evening," I said slowly. "Nothing happens to my property while I'm gone." "Of course not," Eleanor purred. "Enjoy your brother's special day." I almost stayed. I almost canceled the trip. But how could I miss the biggest moment of James's life? He'd always shown up for mine. As I drove off, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Eleanor on the phone, pointing toward my property line. When I turned onto my street that evening, I knew, before I even saw it, that something was terribly wrong. The air was thick with smoke and dust, and the sky had that strange, bruised color it gets after a fire. My heart started to pound. Police cruisers lined the curb in front of my home, or rather, where my home used to be. I slammed the brakes so hard my seatbelt locked across my chest. Where Sarah and I had once sipped iced tea on the porch, there was now a crater. Splintered beams jutted out like ribs from the broken skeleton of what had once been our life together. The rest of my cottage, my history, had slid into the river below in a heap of soggy timber and twisted metal. My house was gone. I stumbled out of my truck, lungs refusing to fill. My eyes scanned the wreckage. The rose garden was flattened. The bird feeder lay broken in the mud. A voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Williams!" It was Eleanor, still wearing that godforsaken clipboard like a shield. Behind her stood 2 of her loyal board members, smug as ever. What did you do?" I rasped. Eleanor, calm as a breeze, handed me a document. "Your property was deemed structurally unsound by our emergency inspection team this morning. The board voted for immediate demolition under HOA Clause 7C for safety mitigation." I barely heard her. My knees buckled. Officer Reyes caught me before I hit the ground. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. He coached my nephew's baseball team last summer. Now he was watching my life reduced to driftwood. This was safe," I gasped. "I had a rain system, security cameras, new joists last fall. Sarah died in this home." "You should have answered your phone," Eleanor added coldly. "We tried to call." I hadn't missed any calls. They never intended to warn me. They'd waited until I was gone. Gregory came hobbling down the street, waving a manila folder. "I called the county," he barked. "No permits for demolition were filed today. This was an illegal action." Eleanor's expression never wavered. "The HOA acted within its emergency powers." I staggered forward. "My wife's ashes were inside," I said. "Her wedding dress. Every photo. Her mother's pearls." Maria, the nurse from across the street, lifted her phone. "I filmed it," she said. "I wasn't sure what I was watching, but I recorded everything." "Please disperse," Eleanor snapped, "or we'll issue fines for loitering." Something cracked in me. "You think this is over a mailbox?" I said, my voice low and trembling. "This was about the land. You want my riverfront property, and you took it while I was at my brother's ceremony." "For your information," she sneered, "he can't help you. No one can. We followed procedure to the letter." But that was the moment her composure cracked. Just for a second. Her husband tugged her arm, whispering something sharp in her ear. I turned and walked toward my truck, trying to keep my legs steady. As I reached the door, my phone rang. James. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice alert. "They bulldozed it, James," I whispered. "The house, it's gone." There was a pause. "I'll be there in 6 hours," he said. "Don't sign anything. Don't speak to anyone else. And Robert, don't you worry. She doesn't know who you are yet, but by tomorrow morning, she will." At exactly 6:01 a.m., the knock on Gregory's front door jolted me from a restless sleep. I'd barely managed 2 hours. The image of my house, cracked, crushed, and bleeding into the river, kept replaying in my mind like a cruel loop. Gregory shuffled to the door in his robe and cracked it open. Standing on the porch as if summoned by divine justice itself was my brother James, still in the crisp black suit from his Supreme Court ceremony the day before, his eyes locked on mine with a focus that cut through every ounce of grief inside me. In one hand he held his garment bag, the same one that carried the judicial robes he wore when he swore an oath to protect the law. "Where's Eleanor?" he asked. No good morning, no small talk, just business. I pointed across the street to her pristine two-story home, white shutters, trimmed hedges, the only house on the block untouched by the chaos she'd created. As if on cue, Eleanor stepped outside, mug in hand, her pink robe fluttering in the spring breeze. She paused, mid-sip, when she noticed the dark sedan in the driveway, and the man standing on Gregory's porch. Her brow furrowed. Then her eyes widened. That was the moment Eleanor Winters realized she hadn't just bulldozed a grieving man's home. She had declared war on the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court's brother. James stepped down onto the lawn, calm but radiating authority. "Mrs. Winters," he called out, voice perfectly level, "you may want to change into something more formal. There will be an emergency injunction filed against you within the hour." Eleanor blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said," James continued, removing the black robes from his garment bag and slipping them on with deliberate ceremony, "you are under formal investigation for unlawful demolition, destruction of private property, and possible fraud under state civil and criminal codes." The blood drained from her face as neighbors began stepping onto their porches, drawn by the sight of a judge in full regalia confronting the HOA president on her own lawn. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding," she stammered. "The HOA acted according to clause." "You falsified permits," came a voice behind her. It was Gregory, holding up a file folder. "The county confirmed it. And," James added, pulling a second document from his briefcase, "we've already secured a court order for an emergency evidentiary hearing. You're expected at the courthouse at 2 p.m. "On what grounds?" Eleanor snapped. "The public testimony of multiple neighbors, video evidence, a demolition carried out without notice, and the small matter of your husband's development company being tied to a riverfront rezoning plan where my brother's cottage used to stand." I watched her carefully manufactured world begin to tremble at its seams. She tried to muster one last defense. "I have powerful friends." James raised an eyebrow. "So do I." Two unmarked police cruisers pulled up beside the curb, and plainclothes detectives approached her front door with a warrant. "You can't do this," she barked as one officer entered her home with evidence bags in hand. "This is harassment." "No," James said softly, "this is due process. The very thing you denied Robert when you tore his life down without warning." Maria emerged from her house, still in her night shift scrubs, holding up her phone. "I've got the whole demolition on video. I tried to stop them. I even warned them it was illegal." "Thank you, ma'am," said one of the detectives, gently taking the phone from her. I stood motionless through it all. Grief and fury churned in my chest, but for the first time since the demolition, I didn't feel powerless. James had lit the first match of justice, and the blaze was catching. I looked to the edge of my property where the rose garden had been. Nothing remained but trampled roots and torn soil, but I could almost hear Sarah's voice in the wind. "You're not alone anymore." By the time 2 p.m. arrived, the Riverdale County Courthouse was standing room only, not because of the regular docket, but because word had spread. A state Supreme Court justice was walking his own brother into court. And the HOA president responsible? Eleanor Winters, once untouchable in our neighborhood, now sat stiffly at the defense table flanked by 3 attorneys in $1,000 suits. James walked me through the courthouse hall with a hand on my back. I was wearing the same suit I'd worn the day Sarah was laid to rest. Dark navy, slightly loose on me now, but it felt like armor. Eleanor turned as I entered, and for a moment her eyes softened, just for a flicker. But then the tight smile returned. The one she'd worn when she fined me for non-native roses, for wind chimes, for existing. Judge Martinez entered, silver hair pulled back, eyes sharp as knives. The courtroom stood, she sat, and then the reckoning began. Case 204B, Williams versus Riverdale Heights HOA and Eleanor Winters, the bailiff announced. Eleanor's lead attorney stood, smoothing his silk tie. Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. The demolition was carried out in good faith, in accordance with updated HOA bylaws, under emergency protocol to remove a structure deemed unsafe. Please stop, Judge Martinez cut in sharply, already flipping through her notes. The court has reviewed your submitted documents. There is no record, none, of this demolition being approved through proper county channels. In fact, the only permit entered was denied. Eleanor leaned in, whispering urgently to her lawyer. He turned pale. Judge Martinez continued. Furthermore, I've compared 3 versions of your HOA bylaws from 2020, 2021, and your most recent revision. Interestingly, the clause you cite, Clause 43C, granting unilateral demolition authority, only appears in the 2023 version. Would you care to explain that discrepancy? The room fell silent. Eleanor's second attorney cleared his throat. There must have been a clerical error. Perhaps the earlier versions weren't archived correctly. Maria stood up from the gallery. That's not true. She held up a flash drive. I have every version on file. I handle the HOA newsletter. That clause wasn't there until last month. A ripple of gasps swept through the room. Judge Martinez turned slowly toward Eleanor. Mrs. Winters, this court finds probable cause to pursue charges of unauthorized demolition, willful property destruction, and possible document tampering. You may be charged both civilly and criminally. I stared straight ahead, not at her, not at the lawyers, but at the grain in the wooden bench in front of me. I kept thinking about Sarah's ring, her photo albums, her rose garden. They'd bulldozed more than a structure. They'd bulldozed a life. But that wasn't the end of the surprises. Your Honor, James said, rising slowly, there is additional evidence. He handed a folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. These are emails between Eleanor Winters and a representative from Apex Text Development. The messages discuss, among other things, timelines for clearing the riverfront parcel, including my brother's property. The emails are time-stamped 1 day before the demolition. Judge Martinez skimmed the first few pages. And this Apex Text Development, is that the same company your husband is employed by, Mrs. Winters? Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came out. Yes, Your Honor, James said, cool as stone. He's listed as a silent partner in their filings. Someone in the audience muttered, She did it for the condos. Another voice, She wanted the whole riverbank. The judge's gavel cracked. Enough. This case is now officially under review for criminal conspiracy. Mrs. Winters, you are ordered not to leave the county. You will surrender your passport and any electronic devices that may contain communications regarding this matter. Eleanor's perfect posture finally wavered. Outside, as reporters surrounded us, James wrapped an arm around me. This was just the first round, he said. We're not finished, not by a long shot. I looked at the courthouse stairs, at the cameras, the neighbors, the murmuring crowd, and I thought, not long ago I was invisible to most of them. Now, they were watching, and maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to understand. That night, back at James's guest room, I couldn't sleep. The courthouse victory was real, but fragile. Eleanor had cracked, yes, but people like her didn't stay cracked. They regrouped, recalculated, retaliated. I knew it deep in my bones. This wasn't over. Around midnight, the doorbell rang. James opened it to find Robert Winters, Eleanor's husband, standing in the rain, holding a locked metal file box. His collar was soaked, his face was pale, and his hands were trembling. I need to make this right, he said quietly. We let him in. Robert sat on the edge of the couch like a man confessing a crime to a priest. Eleanor kept this in our bedroom closet. I never looked. I didn't want to know. But after court today, after what you showed, I had to see it. He opened the box. Inside were pages of bank transfers, architectural renderings, and most damning of all, signed agreements with Apex Text Development. Eleanor hadn't just bulldozed my home. She had signed it away months ago, along with 10 other lots across Riverdale Heights. She started small, Robert said, voice cracking. 1 lot, Then 2. She got braver as nobody questioned her, and every time someone left, it made the rest easier to intimidate. James was already snapping pictures with his phone. And this? Robert pulled out a voice recorder. He pressed play. A recording crackled to life. Eleanor's voice, calm and composed. Williams won't move. But once the rose garden is gone and the house accidentally collapses, we'll finish the parcel. The developer doesn't care how it happens, as long as it's cleared before Q2. I gripped the arm of the couch until my knuckles turned white. James exhaled slowly. This is beyond HOA abuse, he said. This is organized fraud, and it's going to blow the doors off this neighborhood. The next morning, James met with the district attorney, who moved fast. By noon, subpoenas were flying. But what happened next surprised even me. People started talking. At first it was whispers, then murmurs, then declarations. Maria printed flyers for a block meeting, not an HOA board meeting, a community meeting. And that night, under the string lights in her backyard, over 40 neighbors showed up. Gregory, the retired attorney, stood up first. Eleanor fined me $300 for my son's boat trailer when it was legally parked on my own driveway. I fought it, and she found a violation in my fence instead. I paid a $500 fine for having pumpkins on my porch past Thanksgiving, said another woman. She said it violated seasonal decor timelines. It snowballed from there. She wrote up my daughter's lemonade stand. She reported my dog for excessive tail wagging. My husband passed away and I didn't mow the lawn for 2 weeks. She threatened a lien. One by one, these ordinary people found their voices. And the truth that emerged was staggering. Eleanor's HOA didn't just enforce rules, they weaponized them. Every board seat was appointed, not voted. The financial reports had never been made public. The HOA had paid triple the going rate for security upgrades from a firm owned by Eleanor's cousin. The new sidewalk lights? The company was run by her godson. And the landscaping firm that mowed the park? You guessed it, David Winters sat on their board. It wasn't a community. It was a kingdom, and she'd ruled it like royalty, but the walls were falling fast. James worked late that night filing motions. Gregory drafted an emergency resolution to halt all HOA board actions until a full audit was complete. Maria organized a petition, door to door, and collected 91 signatures in 48 hours. Even Mrs. McConnell, who hadn't left her house since her hip surgery 2 years ago, signed it through her window with a trembling hand. It felt like a sleeping town had finally awakened, and it wasn't going back to bed. But it was when the county sent 2 unmarked cars to Eleanor's home, followed by a moving truck, that we knew something big had happened. The neighbors lined the sidewalks, the blinds fluttered open in every window, and when Eleanor stepped out, flanked by investigators and a real estate agent, suitcase in hand, nobody clapped. They just watched, and for the first time she looked small. But not everyone was watching in silence. As Eleanor's car pulled away, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Gregory. "You might want to sit down," he said. "There's more coming." We thought Eleanor's exit would be the end of it. The truth is, her departure was only the start of something larger, because when a tyrant falls, a vacuum opens, and if you're not ready, someone worse can step in. That's what James warned me about as we watched Eleanor's SUV disappear from Riverdale Heights. He said, don't just celebrate her downfall, build something stronger in its place. Otherwise, history has a way of repeating itself. So we got to work. The next community meeting wasn't just a gathering, it was a turning point. Maria brought a folding table. Gregory brought the bylaws, actual printed copies. I brought lemonade and a cardboard box full of old HOA letters that had once threatened to fine me for everything from my rose bushes to the way I parked my truck. We met in the open. No more secret votes, no more intimidation, just neighbors and notepads, and more truth than this community had heard in years. Gregory stood at the front. "What we need," he said, "is a new charter, one that reflects who we really are, not who Eleanor wanted us to be." He pulled out a single-page draft. "No resident shall be fined without a vote. Board members must be elected, not appointed. Budgets must be public, all records transparent, No rule can override respect. The group went quiet. Then Mrs. Ramirez, who used to be fined for the toys on her lawn, raised her hand. Can we add a clause about family spaces? My grandkids love sidewalk chalk. You bet we can, Gregory smiled, and he wrote it in by hand. That night, the first draft of the Riverdale Restoration Charter was born. Every household would have one vote. Board terms would be limited to 1 year, and any fine over $100 would require a two-thirds community majority to approve. Maria dubbed it People First Policy. James called it legally bulletproof. I just called it justice. But while we rewrote the rules, something else was happening, something unexpected. We were healing. People who hadn't spoken in years were now sharing pie recipes and helping repair fences. Neighbors who'd once feared fines now offered to fix each other's roofs. One man, retired Navy, took it upon himself to mow the lawns of 3 elderly residents each Saturday. Even the kids changed. Where before they'd been told to keep it down, they were now painting a mural on the side of the community shed. Flowers, rainbows, even a portrait of Sarah's rose garden. And speaking of the roses, they bloomed again. Gregory's cousin, a master gardener, had taken the clippings I'd saved after the demolition. He'd nurtured them in his greenhouse, and when he returned them weeks later, they were taller, stronger, as if they too had something to prove. We planted them at the heart of the new community garden, right under the sign that read, "This soil remembers." But not everyone welcomed the change. Late one night, I spotted a man watching the neighborhood from a dark sedan, parked under the old elm tree near the creek. When I approached, the engine started and he sped off. James filed a police report. I upgraded my home security. The whispers began again. Some claimed the developers weren't done, that Eleanor had partners with deeper pockets and sharper claws. Others said the land was still listed on future zoning maps for mixed-use redevelopment. But we didn't back down. Gregory worked with the county registrar to put a legal conservation easement on the remaining lots. James petitioned for historic district status, arguing that Sarah's rose garden and the stories tied to it were worth protecting. And then came the vote. A full neighborhood referendum, held on a Sunday afternoon with lemonade, music, and homemade baked goods. Every resident cast their ballot. Kids dropped them into a coffee can covered in stickers. And when we counted them that evening, the new charter passed unanimously. Even Frank, the old HOA treasurer who had once sided with Eleanor, cast a yes. That night, under the porch light of my newly rebuilt cottage, James raised a glass. "To the people," he said. "To the land," said Gregory. And I finished it. To finally being home. But as the laughter echoed down the street, Maria walked over with her phone in hand, her expression concerned. She showed me a text message from a blocked number. "The roses might have bloomed, but weeds always come back." I read it twice, then looked at her. "Someone's not done," I said. Maria nodded. "But neither are we." We thought we had turned the page. That Eleanor's arrest, the charter reforms, and the blooming roses meant the story was over. But every garden has roots that run deeper than we can see, and some belong to weeds. It began with a late-night knock. I was reading on the porch, just me, a cold drink, and the gentle hum of summer crickets. Then came a soft tapping, not urgent, not loud, just off. When I opened the door, I froze. It was Robert Winters, Eleanor's husband, the same man who once backed every bulldozer and contract that nearly wiped my life into the river. But this time he looked different. Not sharp, not smug, just tired. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, holding up both hands. "I'm here because I think she's coming back." "What do you mean?" I asked, not letting go of the door frame. "She's out early," he said. "Minimum security, good behavior, no press coverage. The developers pulled strings. I divorced her. Tried to distance myself, but she hasn't let go." He pulled out a folded envelope. Inside were photographs, recent, grainy, but unmistakable. Eleanor standing outside a county recorder's office. Eleanor with a man in a tailored suit. Platinum Developers. Eleanor pointing at a map. "She's trying to claw her way back," Robert said. "She believes this land still belongs to her, that you all ruined her vision." I didn't respond right away, because deep down I knew. Some part of me had always expected it, because for people like Eleanor, control wasn't about order, it was about power, and power never sleeps. Maria called an emergency meeting the next night. Every seat was filled. James joined via live stream. He was out of town consulting on a judicial ethics panel, but his voice echoed steady and calm across the speakers. "Don't act in fear," he said. "Act in preparation. If she returns, meet her with law, not anger, with light, not chaos." Still, the tension was undeniable. Some residents panicked. Talk of selling homes started again. The Thompsons quietly listed their property. Frank, the ex-treasurer, considered stepping down from the board. But then something changed. Gregory, leaning on his cane at the front of the meeting, cleared his throat. "We've seen what Eleanor does when she has power," he said. "But let me ask, what do we do when we have it?" Silence. Then he held up a new petition. One he'd been quietly drafting for weeks. The Riverdale Restoration Fund, a legally binding trust, protected from outside developers, funded by voluntary contributions from the neighborhood, small grants, and even donations from strangers who had followed our story online. "With this," he said, "we can finally buy out the surrounding buffer lots, create a green belt, a permanent barrier between us and the wolves." It passed by near unanimous vote. But just when we thought we were tightening the gates, Eleanor found another way in. 2 weeks later, during one of our community garden cleanup days, a woman none of us recognized joined the group. Late 50s, gray cardigan, friendly enough. She smiled, she helped prune tomatoes, she offered lemonade. Only when Gregory went to record her name for the volunteer list did we learn her real identity. E. Martin, Eleanor's maiden name. She was using a false identity, trying to embed herself. Like a weed through cracks in the sidewalk. When confronted, she didn't flinch. "I just wanted to see the garden," she said calmly. "See what you built." Police were called. A trespass notice was issued. But she didn't fight. She just smiled and walked away. "Funny thing about roses," she said over her shoulder. "They look nice. Until the thorns find you." That night, many were shaken. Even I couldn't sleep. I walked the garden alone, checked the locks, reviewed security cameras. And then Maria arrived, quietly, with a folded note in her hand. She left this at my door. It read, let them have their garden, I'll take the water." We didn't know what it meant until the next morning. A construction crew hired by the county arrived to begin work upstream. Platinum Developers had purchased land through a shell company. David Winters was no longer listed. It was all legal, all approved. They were building a dam, a flood control measure, they said. But James confirmed the documents. "This is a Trojan horse," he warned. "They want to control the river's flow, and that means your land value, your safety, your rights are back on the table." Suddenly, it wasn't just about Eleanor anymore. It was about what she'd left behind. Contracts, connections, quiet hands pulling strings in back rooms. But something had changed in us too. We weren't victims anymore. We were survivors, builders. Fighters who had stood shoulder to shoulder through the storm and come out stronger. "We fight again," Maria said. "But this time, we start with one thing they never expected." "Forgiveness?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, unity." And that's when I realized Eleanor didn't just underestimate my home. She underestimated my neighbors. We always believed the worst was behind us, that after fire, bulldozers, and courtroom battles, we'd earned our peace. But peace isn't something you earn once. It's something you build again and again. And when the river changed course, literally, we found out just how far our roots had really grown. It started with a rumble. Not from a bulldozer this time, but from the cliffs upstream. Dynamite charges. Platinum developers had begun excavation for their controlled retention basin, a project supposedly designed to reduce flooding. What they didn't say? That it would reroute water directly toward Riverdale Heights. We had 30 days before the flow changed, 30 days before rising water could drown everything we'd rebuilt. And in that moment, we had a choice. Run or dig in. We chose the latter. James, my brother, my shield, rallied legal experts. Gregory filed emergency motions with the State Environmental Board. But it was Maria who said what needed to be said. Paper only goes so far. If we want to hold the line, we do it together, with our hands, with our backs, with our hearts. And we did. We called in volunteers from 3 counties: farmers, retirees, veterans, students. Neighbors who'd once barely nodded now passed sandbags side by side like lifelong friends. Every house contributed, every hand helped. Even the Thompsons, who had been ready to sell, returned their deposit. But the twist we didn't expect? Robert, Eleanor's ex-husband. He arrived unannounced one morning with a truck full of blueprints. "I worked on the dam project," he said quietly, "and I know where the water's going, and I know how to stop it." We stared at him, stunned. "I can't undo what we did to your home," he said to me, eyes trembling. "But maybe I can help save what came after it." That day we built berms, redirected overflow trenches, even carved out a spill basin near the bluff. It was hard work, dangerous work. And as the deadline loomed, we wondered if we'd done enough. Then the rains came. It was midnight when the storm hit, the kind that silences everything but its own roar. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the floor, and the river rose faster than any forecast had predicted. But we were ready. We had sandbags where Eleanor once had bylaws. We had community where there once was fear. And when morning came and the clouds broke, Riverdale Heights was still standing. Not a single home flooded. The developers? They issued a statement blaming inaccurate soil data and quietly halted work. 2 weeks later, the project was officially scrapped. We had won. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like peace. A kind of stillness I hadn't known since before Sarah passed. Since before Eleanor turned our lives into a battlefield. I stood where my cottage once was, now a modest, strong 2-story home framed by wild roses, and I saw something remarkable. Life. Children riding bikes down the hill, Maria laughing with Robert, now her steady companion, Gregory reading HOA reform proposals aloud to a new board made up entirely of volunteers, even James sitting with a glass of lemonade, no longer a justice for the state, but just a brother again. "Do you ever miss the old place?" Maria asked me that evening as fireflies blinked above our porch. "I do," I said honestly. "But I don't miss who I used to be in it." She nodded slowly. "We all changed, didn't we?" "Some of us grew," I said. "Some of us bloomed." She smiled. "And some of us finally pulled up the weeds." That fall, we dedicated a bench by the river. Carved into the stone was a quote Sarah once loved. "What you plant in the soil of friendship, you will harvest in the season of hope." There, among the flowers, the mud, and the memories, I placed Sarah's wedding ring beneath the soil of her favorite rose bush, not as a symbol of loss, but as a seed of what we reclaimed. If you've listened this far, you've heard about bulldozers, courtrooms, betrayal, and fire. But that's not really what this story is about. This story is about what we do after the wreckage. It's about a man who lost everything, his home, his memories, his sense of safety, and still stood up, not with fists, but with evidence, with courage, and eventually with neighbors. It's about how fear and silence allowed one person to hold an entire community hostage, and how, with one spark of unity, that grip was broken forever. Because the truth is, rules don't build neighborhoods. People do. It's easy to forget that in today's world, where power often comes with a logo, a legal form, or a loud voice telling you to comply or pay. But real strength, the kind that lasts, it grows in quiet resistance, in showing up for each other, in refusing to surrender what's right. I lost my house. I lost Sarah's rose garden. I nearly lost my belief that people would do the right thing. But in that loss, something far greater was planted. We didn't just rebuild homes, we rebuilt trust. We didn't just push back against injustice, we turned strangers into family. And the greatest irony? Eleanor tried to erase me with her rules. Instead, she gave me a platform. She tried to break a community. Instead, she handed us a reason to rise. So if someone ever tries to scare you out of your home, your peace, or your dignity, remember this: stand your ground, find your voice, and when the storm passes, plant something new in its place. Because the things we rebuild, brick by brick, neighbor by neighbor, those are the things no HOA, no tyrant, no storm can ever take from us again. Not now, not ever.